I didn't want to come out as transgender. I didn't want anyone to know. And a part of me still doesn't want anyone to know, because as an autoandrophile, which is a subtype of transgender, if I admit to that, people are going to know a lot of things about me that I kind of wish nobody knew about me. But I felt like I had to. I still feel like that. I still feel like I have to come out as transgender, and I need to talk about my own experience, because what I'm seeing in the public discourse right now is a lot of people who are trans who are speaking out against transitioning children. And I'm seeing a lot of people who are detransitioners, who are telling stories about terrible things happening to them. And the thing that I have not yet seen is people who are transgender who did not feel a need to transition and chose not to. And that's what I am. I am a transgender person who did not transition and will not transition. And you might be saying, well, how do you know you're transgender then? Because that was a question that I struggled with a lot. Like, I was 95% sure I was transgender, but I couldn't be 100% certain, and it felt wrong to come out and say, oh, I'm trans, but I won't transition, until I could be very certain. And that was when I discovered information on autoandrophilia. I'm definitely transgender. At least I'm definitely an autoandrophile. The definition of transgender is very vague, so there may come a day when people define transgender in a different way and then would say that I am not transgender, which is fine. I don't mind that at all. It doesn't make me any less of an autoandrophile. That is a very permanent fixture in my life, and I'm 36 years old. I've been like this for a very long time. The thing that really bothers me is that parents are being told, and children as well, you can either be, for example, for a biologically female child, you can either be a dead daughter or a live son, and that is a very horrible place to be put. It's a horrible place from which to make a decision, because then you feel like you really don't have choices. And I think it's very important that people who are parents of trans children, people who are themselves trans children, and just the world in general, they need to be aware that trans people have options. We have choices. We have tools that are available to us to help us cope with transgender feelings, with gender dysphoria, and to obtain that beloved thing, which is gender euphoria. I would not ever suggest to anyone that they shouldn't transition if that's what they feel they need to do. But when we go to children, people who are not yet adults, and tell them, oh, you need to transition, that is wrong. And it's wrong because they have not yet developed enough of an understanding of themselves to know what feeds that sense of gender euphoria and what doesn't. Because this is something people need to understand about transgender people. We are not all the same. We are not little cookie cutter shapes taken out of a sheet of dough. We're individuals. And every individual transgender person is going to have slightly different needs and slightly different responses to the world around them and their own mental state. So when a person is young, and if you are the parent of a young person who's coming to you and saying, I think I'm transgender, it's a really good time in your life, in their life, to learn about themselves, think about what's going on in their head, and make this voyage of self-discovery where they start to figure out what gives them gender euphoria. If you transition right away, you don't know what that is. You're going by the cookie cutter method, where it's like, oh, I'm going to do what everybody else has done, and that's going to work for me. And it doesn't. It doesn't work like that. Transgender people respond differently to different stimuli, for lack of a better word. I know it sounds very scientific and cold, but it's true. There are things that give me an incredible sense of gender euphoria that are just amazing and wonderful and very fulfilling to me that wouldn't do a single thing for other transgender people. There are things that other transgender people do, like, cross-dressing, that I don't begin to understand. I look at it and it's like, okay, I don't get it, but okay. However, there are things that have happened to me when I was dressed in more masculine clothing that it were really feeding that sense of gender euphoria, namely being mistaken for a man. So it's complicated, and it's something that people really should take time to figure out. I'm not saying don't transition. If you need to transition, transition, but I'm saying that taking the time before you transition to figure out what it is that feeds your soul, that's important. Because maybe transition isn't a necessary step for you. And maybe transition isn't actually going to give you what you feel that you need. For me, when I was young, I didn't know what transgender was. I understood that I was different. And I experienced occasional bursts of gender euphoria. And it was amazing and it was miraculous. And so, of course, I naturally pursued those. And so I pursued activities that fed my sense of gender euphoria without understanding why those activities made me so happy. Now, as an adult, I can look back on it and say, oh, okay, now I know what I was doing. But at the time, it was confusing for me, and it took some figuring out. I didn't necessarily look at it from a standpoint of gender because I didn't know that it was a gendered behavior that I was enacting. In my teenage years, as I was growing up, pursuing activities like art and exercise, and I'm sure there were a range of other activities that I did as well, really helped me to get in touch with my own inner masculine side and feed it and build a relationship with it. And that was really important for me. That was one of the foundational elements of my growing up and becoming an adult and understanding of myself. I didn't immediately jump to transition. And I think that this push for young people who suspect they're transgender or identify as transgender to immediately transition, I'm not sure that's good for any of us. It might be good for a few, a very, very few. But the vast majority of us, I'm not sure it's helping any of them. And I feel very bad right now because there are a lot of parents who feel like you have to transition your kids in order to keep them happy, keep them mentally well, keep them healthy, keep them alive. And I think for many of us, and I mean, you are a parent, you know your kid. And this is an important thing to be aware of. If they are transgender, you're going to have to accept the fact that your kid is going to be different. And that is okay. But I see a lot of parents who, they're perfectly accepting of the fact that their kid is different and unique and is going to have their own unique and individual needs. They're struggling with the fact that those kids are then being fed through a cookie cutter system and being given a one-size-fits-all solution to being transgender. And that's not good. That's not healthy. So if your child, if your teenager, thinks that they are transgender, it's a really good time for them to perhaps keep a diary and start writing down what it is about them that makes them feel better as a transgender person, what gives them gender euphoria, and keep an understanding of what it is that helps them maintain an even keel mentally, what makes them happy. These are important things, and growing up is about coming to understand yourself, understanding your sexuality, understanding your gender identity, understanding who you are. And rushing to the finish line and saying, okay, we'll just transition me right now, or we'll put a pause on my puberty because that's going to give me time to make a decision, that's not good. That's not healthy. But I will leave it to the experts to explain why puberty blockers might not necessarily be the best idea for your child. It's important to take the time as a child to be a child and to figure out who you are. And being transgender is no different. Being a transgender child is no different. It's important to take the time to figure out who you are on the inside before rushing to express that through radical surgical procedures. You might need those procedures. You might ultimately decide that is what I want for me in my life. But you have to understand who you are first. And I don't think we're giving children the time to do that. And that's hurting them. And it's wrong. I see a lot of people who want to protect transgender kids by giving them access to these surgeries, these procedures, these hormones. And what I think they fail to understand, and what I want to communicate to you, is that I care about transgender children. I was a transgender child. And I was given the opportunity to live a healthy, reproductively successful life. I was given options as I grew up to find ways on my own and discover myself how to live my life as a transgender person. And I was very fortunate. I found coping strategies to alleviate my gender dysphoria and to feed myself a steady and very satisfying amount of gender euphoria. And I have been able to live a very happy and functional life without any hormones, without any surgical procedures. Now, that was my journey, and your journey might be different, but you don't know that until you've taken the time to figure it out. That's an important step in the process, and that step is being neglected.